You're about to listen to a spirited conversation I had with the new chair of the Democratic National Committee, Jaime Harrison. We cover topics ranging from voter suppression to civic engagement and everything in between about what it means to be part of the American democracy. Chairman Harrison is passionate about mobilizing younger generations to get involved, and I hope you get inspired. Enjoy the episode. Chairman Harrison, welcome to Fostering a Difference. First, I want to thank you for taking a chance on this new podcast and for joining us here to have this conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Professor Foster. I really appreciate it and looking forward to the conversation.
I am one who loves stories, and we learn from other people's stories and hearing their life journeys, and that's why we're here today. And I'm anxious to hear your story. Part of my story that I want to share with you is my sheer love of politics, and I am a political junkie, and I get this honestly. My parents have long been involved in local, county, and state politics in Illinois. You ask my dad to show you his Democratic Party card, and he will gladly take it out of his wallet. I keep a photo on my desk. I think you'll appreciate this. I keep a photo on my desk that was taken in 1977 of my brother and me behind Mel Price's desk in his DC office when Mel was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. My brother's hunched over with a pen in his hand, looking as though he's signing something very important, and I'm kind of just staring off into the camera. And I think I've watched probably almost every presidential debate and vice presidential debate since 1980. And in all transparency, I was only 8 at the time. And, I consume polls, all the polls, and we know that polls have been wonky in the last few years, but, I consume them like my 4-year-old granddaughter consumes Hershey Kisses, right? Just voraciously. So that's a little bit of my story, and I am excited that you are here to have this conversation with us. So let's jump right into it if you're ready to do that.
Yeah.
So, what do you say to kids in the small towns across this country, much like Orangeburg, South Carolina, where you grew up, or in Southern Illinois, where I grew up, who don't see government ensuring that they have a path that leads them to their American dream? What do you say to those kids?
Well, those are the kids that I fight for each and every day. When I think back to my story and how I got involved in politics, I got involved because I saw that there were some folks who had backgrounds similar to my own, who grew up poor, grew up in a single parent family, or grew up in communities that didn't have much, rural areas, people like Jesse Jackson, Bill Clinton. And I saw that they were able to rise to the top of American politics, despite things that greater society would say were black marks against them, right? And not only were they able to rise up, but when they rose up, they were actually able to do things to help people who were living in situations similar to their own. And I saw politics as a gateway to transform the nation, but to provide opportunity for the least of these in our society. And that's part of the reason why I got involved. That's part of the reason why I decided that I wanted to get involved into politics, because in the end of the day, I felt that it was a mechanism by which to make a difference, to improve the lives of folks, to give people a chance to live their American dreams. And so, one of the things I tell young people, you can't look at politics as this something that is just etched in stone that it can't change. And you can't just be an observer of politics. You got to roll up your sleeves and get involved. You can't sit back. Congressman Clyburn, in one of his first TV ads, I think it was the first TV ad when he was running for Congress, he told a story about traveling along on a dirt road in South Carolina with his father. And there was an old tree limb that fell, and it was blocking the road. And the congressman looked over to his dad and said, well, somebody needs to go and move that tree limb before someone hits it. And his dad stopped the car and said, well, son, aren't you somebody? And they went back, and he went and took with his dad, lifted the limb off of the road and moved it. That's what politics are. Yeah, it's all about what we are willing to do in order to make the change that we know that needs to be made. And so, the reason why I ran for the United States Senate was because I was sitting next to my wife and was talking about how we really needed somebody to represent us in the Senate. I've been recruiting candidates for years. And she looked at me and she said, well, why don't you do it? And, for me, it never dawned that I should think about it. I had thought about running for office, but never I hadn't thought about running for the Senate. At least I wasn't thinking about running against Lindsey Graham in 2024. I mean, hell, this man was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He had run for president, senior senator from South Carolina. I'm a little round-headed boy from Orangeburg, South Carolina, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, my wife was right. Why not? You have the things that you believe in. And if you don't stand up for the things you believe in, why do you think somebody else is going to? And so I tell young folks who are sitting on the sidelines, well, I wonder why people won't do this, or why. Then aren't you somebody? What are you going to do in order to affect the change that you know that needs to happen in your community and society in general, in this country overall? And so this is something that we all have to be engaged in.
And so is that what you say to them?
Yes.
Why not? Why not you?
I mean, it's part of the reason why I wrote my book a few years ago. It's called Climbing the Hill: How to Build a Career in Politics and Make a Difference. It's about making sure that we all are participating in this democracy, and we're doing all that we can to make a difference. That we're not sitting by idly waiting for somebody else to do something for us, but that we're going to roll up our sleeves and do what we know needs to be done in order to change the world for the better.
And, a lot of people would argue that America is, the systems in America are designed to privilege the privileged. And when a lot of kids in places like I grew up and where you grew up don't see themselves represented in the governmental system, in places where people are making decisions that affect their lives at the local level. I mean, how are they to go from being an observer of politics to being the one to get out of the car and pick up the branch and get it out of the road?
Yeah. Well, and that's part of why I decided to run. Nobody in my family was ever involved in politics. My mom had, dropped out of school when she was 16 in order to take care of me. My grandparents who raised me, my grandfather had a 4th grade education. He paved roads. My grandmother had an 8th grade education. She picked cotton, right? So none of them had a very formal education. None of them were interested in politics. But I remember sitting in 1988 watching the Democratic convention with my grandfather. And Jesse Jackson gets up and starts to speak.
Yes.
Here's a black man from South Carolina, raised by, single parent household, grandparents influential. And there was so much in his life that was very similar. And in his speech, he was talking about young people standing up and having hope that things are going to be better and working in order to make things better. And that inspired me. And then you fast forward 4 years later, you got in 1992, you got Bill Clinton, a man who grew up in Hope, Arkansas. So much of his life story was so similar to my own. And eventually he went on and he went to Georgetown and he went to Yale. And I did it the reverse. I went to Yale and Georgetown. And then, he went, I remember that picture of him meeting President Kennedy when he was in Boy State. I was in Boy State. I remember, him speaking at the convention and just inspiring me that, yes, even a kid who grew up in rural South Carolina, he grew up in rural Arkansas, could still end up getting involved in politics and making a difference in the lives of people. And so for those young folks, I want them to know the thing that is great about America. Yes, our system sometimes has a lot of challenges and there are a lot of barriers. I'm not saying that it's easy, but what is great about America is that those stories are uniquely American. I've gone to other democracies. I've gone to other nations. And I remember the first time when I was a young staffer on Capitol Hill and I was, I was running the whip operation for Jim Clyburn. And I went to Australia on a delegation trip and I was meeting with my counterparts there. And, they were quizzing me they were saying, well, are you sure you're not from a well-off family? No, I'm not. Are you sure that you didn't have a family member involved in politics? No. And it's like, wow, that would rarely ever happen here in this country. Australia is one of the great democracies on this globe. But my story is not a unique story in this country because there are so many people who are just like me, who have grown up to do amazing and great things despite, slim upbringings. That's what makes America great. But what we have to do is to make sure that those opportunities still persist for generations and generations to come. And that's why the work that I do is so important to me, because I want to make sure that ladder that was let down by folks like Jim Clyburn and Bill Clinton and others is not pulled up for the future generations to come. That's why we have to continue that work. That's why it's important for these young people to feel as though that they have the power to shape society in the manner that it needs to be shaped. They don't have to just be casual observers to this process. When you look at change in this country, and I say this to young people all the time, every major change in this nation has happened because of young people. Even from the inception of the nation itself, Thomas Jefferson was in his 20s when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. You look at the Civil Rights Movement, it was driven by high schoolers and young college kids who stepped up and said, you know what, enough is enough. We don't want to live in a world like this anymore, right? And so, again, for young people, I want them to understand the power that they have to transform this country into something that they want to live in, that they want to bring their kids up in. And so, that's very important for me, that empowerment, that sense that you have the power to shape and change. It's critical.
And yeah, I have two nephews, one in his late 20s, one in his early 30s. And when I talk to them about these kinds of issues, it's not as though they are totally apathetic. And I hear this from other young adults that I work with. It's that they are frustrated with a system that they see as entrenched in ideology, and they get frustrated with a system where the actors fail to compromise or have a general unwillingness to compromise. How do we help young adults or young people in general overcome that, or work to change that part of the system too? Because what I've seen from young adults is that as a barrier for them becoming engaged in the process. They just get frustrated and say, well, we don't get anything done.
Well, listen, I grew up in a very Christian household, and There's parable from the Bible. Faith without works is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Works is the action that we all have to take. We can't just hope that things get better, right? Just hoping that things get better or hoping somebody does something. In the end, things don't change because of that. You have to put in the work. You have to put in the action. Young people have the power. This is the thing I also tell young people. I said, what's the largest demographic block in this country, voting block in this country? It's not older Americans, not middle-aged Americans. It's young Americans.
Yeah.
You have the largest block. If you get registered, if you mobilize and change, you have the power to change in and of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't just sit back and be like, oh, I wish somebody would do. No, you need to move the branch, move it out of the road. You got the power. You got the numbers to do just that. Don't sit by on the sidelines and say, I wish somebody else would do it. You do it. Step up and do it because it can be done. There are people right now who know that young people won't do anything, and so they are fine and they're content to continue the policies and the practices that keep them entrenched in power.
And one of the ways they can do that is going to the ballot box.
As I tell people all the time, here in South Carolina, our motto is while I breathe, I hope. Mm-hmm. And I tell folks, I want to change that motto because it's not, yes, that's great. But in order to bring hope, there's one only other thing that I know that really can bring hope to communities. And that's when we go to the ballot box and we vote. So for me, my motto is while I breathe, I vote, because that is how we bring hope to the communities that are so important for them to have. And so we got the power to change the society the way we want. And we only need to go. And that is the great equalizer, because my vote is worth as much as the vote from President Biden. Take the most powerful person on this globe. We have the same power. We get one vote. Donald Trump, one vote. Bill Gates, one vote, right? It is the great equalizer. And the problem we have is people give up that power by not exercising.
But would you argue that all people have equal access to the ballot box?
No, and that's the problem. There are a lot of barriers, and we see it right now in the Republican Party. And this is one of the things, excuse my language, that just pisses me off.
Yeah, me too.
It is because I think our right to vote, of all of the great rights that we have as Americans, our right to vote is the most sacred right that we have. It is the foundational right by which all other rights are built upon. And when that is chipped away, and when that is encumbered because of all of these rules and regulations, not to make voting easier, not to open it up, but to make it much more difficult because there is a certain group who wants to keep power. It's shameful. It is absolutely shameful. Yeah. I remember, I think this was in 2004, 2005 or so. It was during the second Iraq war. And we sent our sons and daughters overseas to liberate Iraq. And you remember when they were all voting for the first time, they were dipping their fingers in purple paint.
Yep.
And the Republicans in Congress would run to the floor to give their special 1-minute remarks. Like, look at what we were able to do. For the first time, these Iraqis can vote in their nation, and they're all celebrating, and that's something to celebrate. But all the while here in America, what were they doing? Putting up barriers and obstacles to prohibit Americans from exercising their most sacred right. And that's fundamentally wrong. In the end of the day, I want 100% participation in our vote. 100%, because I am confident in my side being able to make the case of why we should be elected. But that's not the mentality on the other side of the aisle, because they are hell-bent are going back to an era where we have been before, where we cannot go back again. My grandparents didn't always have the opportunity to vote here in South Carolina. Where my grandfather told me he wasn't always considered a whole man in this state. So why in the world would I want my sons to grow up in an estate that is going back to that era? It's not going to happen. We're going to do everything that we can to fight back against that, because we are not going back.
And in post-2020 election, we've seen the rise of, this is just one example, the rise of new quote unquote voter ID laws, and in states such as Georgia and Florida. What's the takeaway here? What are we supposed to make of this renewed effort that's been explained away as, well, we saw some new issues arise during the pandemic that tells us we need to strengthen our systems.
That's
around.
Bull crap.
Yep. So what's our takeaway?
Well, the takeaway is they lost an election, and now they're trying to find ways in order to ensure that they win the future ones. They're playing politics right now with people's rights. All the time they love to talk about the Second Amendment and how sacred that is, right? It's a bunch of hypocrites on the other side. And listen, I got a lot of Republican friends, but you got to call it like it is. There's so much hypocrisy right now. The lie after lie after lie. They say it's about election integrity. That's bull. It's not about election integrity. We saw that there was no fraud that was done in this election. We've had courts after courts after courts said that. We've had even Republican secretaries of state that have said it. But yet they continue the big lie. They're even lying about whether or not there was an insurrection on January 6th. Not like we didn't see the people crawling all over the Capitol, breaking windows, having nooses, asking for the vice president and the speaker of the House. And then you get a Republican congressman who was barricading himself in the House chamber, go to a hearing and said, well, it was just like any other normal day on Capitol Hill. Do you barricade yourself in the House chamber every damn day?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous that they think that they can tell these lies and American people won't care about it. And so we just have to continue to call it out for what it is, and we have to continue to battle back. And in the end of the day, these people don't deserve to be in power because they don't know what to do with it, because it's only concentrated on them and what they get out of it, instead of doing what you're supposed to do with power, which is to help the people, the least of these in our society, to make sure that everybody else can live the American dream. That's what you're sent to Washington, D.C. to do.
And I will tell you that I've been on Capitol Hill a lot in my life, starting with that first trip in 1977. And I never saw anything like I saw on January 6th. So again, part of my aim with this podcast is to give folks tools to make a difference in their own corner of the world, either locally within their immediate family or their community, or even on a larger scale. How do concerned citizens ensure that all folks have equal access to the ballot box? We're talking about voting rights. We're talking about the very foundation of democracy.
One of the things that's going to be really important is you got to keep your representatives honest. And I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, independents, and whoever. You have to let them know that they work for you, not the other way around. Because these politicians believe they can draw the districts that they want, they can choose the voters that they want. They believe that they're all powerful. And the analogy I love to say that many of them these politicians believe that they are the sun, but in actuality, they're just the moon. Mm-hmm. Because the power that the moon has only reflects the power that the light it gets from the sun. The sun is the American people, are the people in these districts. It's the citizens in these countries. They have the power. Representatives are only reflecting that light. And so we got to pop this bubble and dispel this myth in their heads that these people are the most powerful people of walking the face of the earth. No, because in the end of the day, when the American people get fed up, they can bring you home. And it's far time for us to start exercising the power that we have. Don't be just these observers. As I mentioned earlier, we can't just be the observers on the side of the road like somebody needs to move that branch. No, we need to do it. If we are fed up with these people who are representing us because they're not representing us, they're only representing themselves, then it's time to bring them home. There is nothing that's written that these are the people that have to represent us. So it's important that we stand up, we look and see, are people working for us? Are they working for our families? Are they doing good things for our communities? And if the answer is no, then they don't deserve to be there anymore. And again, I don't care if they're independents, Republicans, or Democrats. If the people are no longer doing the work if these representatives are no longer doing the work of the people, they no longer deserve to be in power. And we got to fundamentally change that. And so that's the story that I'm pushing and trying to wake people up, because it's important right now. Our democracy is on the line right now. And we can't afford to be, just observers on the side of the road.
So this is my last question for you. Besides voting, I mean, you just said yourself, our democracy is on the line. So besides voting, what would you tell young adults to get out and do that advances democracy?
I say get involved. Get involved in something. Have it be a nonprofit or your local Democratic Party or whatever. Get involved. Run for office. Work on Capitol Hill. Work in your state legislature. Understand the process, both so that you know how to make change externally and internally. The most important thing that you can do is understand the rules of the road. Understand how the game is played so that you can play it and you can win. And that's the important component of all of that. So learn as much as you can, pick up as many books as you can, get involved locally to understand that process, intern on the Hill, intern in state legislatures. It's important that you really just get your arms around this so that you know that you affect change, not just by protesting, but also by working in the bodies that are making the rules that are impacting society as a whole.
So again, Chairman Harrison, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a delight for me and hopefully for all those who are listening and to those who are out there listening to this conversation. Go out and make a difference. Thank you so much.
You all take care now.